So aloha mai kako, everybody. Welcome to our sustainability seminar. I'm Dr. Miku Lentine, and I'm your host for our seminars that we're hosting alongside the Sustainability Club, as well as the Sustainability faculty here at Kapi'olani Community College. Hello to the Access Lounge for all you guys tuning in. Yay, yeah. And so we've got a little crew here. We've got some people online, and we have some people live streaming from our sister space, the Access Lounge at Manoa campus. And here we meet once a week to do all things related to sustainability, climate change, and resilience, and bring on different speakers. And we're so blessed to have our speaker today, who's a dear friend of mine, and Dr. Peeyush Kumar. And so Peeyush is a senior researcher at Microsoft, and his breadth of knowledge is tremendous. So I gave him some things to talk about, but we'll see what we get to hear today. He holds several different patents for things way over my head, but especially to do with AI, microgrid, energy sovereignty, community owned or community resilience around energy, and many more things. Today, though, at least the title of the talk is to do with the commons. Just for a show of hands, how many in the room know what I mean by the commons? Commons. Yes, that's why you guys have to take my class. Okay, so the commons is referring to common pool resources, usually, or shared resources, shared spaces, like the ocean, for example, right? So who manages the ocean? We all share that ocean, right? So we all have to care for the ocean. So that's just an example. So just to make sure you guys get a baseline understanding of what we mean by the commons. And I'm sure we'll hear more about it from Peeyush. So I think with that, I'm just going to hand it over to you, Peeyush. Oh, but I did want to go around the room at least in person, so you can hear who's here. So let's do that. We'll just do in-person introductions for those who are here. If you're online, feel free to just say, share your aloha in the chat and say where you're coming from today. And then we'll have Peeyush jump in with a little better introduction and we'll dive into this talk. So I know you know some of the people in the room, so I think you can hear them. I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Hello, everyone, and hi, Access Lounge. My name is Christopher Pasqua, and I'm a resilience researcher with Serene. I've been a part of it for a number of years, and I'm just really excited to be here. Good to see a good page. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it on to Kai.
Aloha, I'm Kai. I'm a student and officer with Sustainability Club. Nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is Nikki. I'm a counselor here at Kapi'olani Community College for the incoming students and the Pacific Islander students.
Hello, I'm David, the new IT intern here at Serene, and I'm gonna pass it to Rita.
Hi, I'm also on the IT.
All right, so, and looks like Brittany's got put out her introductions online. Thank you, Brittany. And okay, so get a little bit of a sense for who we are. So Peeyush, I'm just gonna hand it to you, and I'm excited for you to take us away. Audience, we should be able to interact back and forth with you, and I can also come back up and help facilitate as well once we get to that place. So I think you have screen sharing capabilities and good to go.
Yeah, thank you, Miku, and aloha, everyone. I guess just one quick question for you, Miku. So with the University of Hawaii Manoa campus there, can you also give me an idea of like what kind of audience is there as well? Just so that I can, if that's not possible, then we'll just do it without that. I just want to include them, just in this interaction kind of thing.
Access Lounge is definitely, anyone from Access can chime in, that'd be helpful. It's usually a mix of students from all across campus, but the lounge itself is to support civic and community engagement and service learning associated with environmental justice, social justice, and uplifting, supporting Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students, I think, as a space. Sounds about right. And they also said they think of it as a creator space. So lots of people, we're gonna have a dumpling party there next week that helps you get a better sense of the space.
Okay, very nice. So thank you, Miko. I appreciate that. Yeah, aloha everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've had some opportunity to interact with some of the students, over the couple of years that Miko and some of the group have come to Seattle for conference. So it is good to see you, Chris. I can see you. You have like a screen of your own with this AI assisted camera. So this presentation that I'm going to talk about, well, it's more of an interactive thing. So there are prompts, and I would love if people want to chime in. I'm not familiar with how the space is set up here. But if people online also want to chime in as well, please feel free to do so. This is more of a conversation. I mean, I definitely have some information heavy slides, and also with that, I would love for this to be a conversation as well. Um, and so when Niku actually sent me an invite, Niku said this code. Can you talk about artificial intelligence, sustainability, and resilience in the IT world, microgrids, community-owned energy, energy sovereignty, local economy, and gift economy? So I was like, okay, so this is a big domain, and we can actually take it in many different directions. So and just given the time that we have, I put together a few slides with that, right? But if there's anything that is not clear, please just chime in as well, and maybe ask questions or prompt me to explain that more. I think it's more important for all of us to sort of like gather the story of this conversation that we're kind of having today, rather than just be like, oh yeah, this is something out of what you could understand. So I don't want it to be like that, right? And again, like there's no bad question, and I've been on this other side many times where I have been shy of asking questions because I think my question is just very silly. But I just want to encourage that there's nothing like that. In fact, every time anyone asks a question, it clarifies things for other people as well as for me too. So having said that, I'll start sharing my slides. So just bear with me here for a second. Just bring this on the presentation mode here. Okay, so let me know if you can see my screen specifically in the presentation mode.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the title of the slide, or just putting all together all these different keywords that was received, is Intelligent Commons, Imagining AI for Regenerative Economy. So as Dr. Miku shared, Intelligent Commons essentially means, commons mean shared resources or shared pool that is accessible, at least conceptually speaking, accessible to the public, to all people. Now, of course, there's many different ways in which different countries and different cultures interact with commons. We're not going to go down in that direction, but just be aware that it's a framework through which people understand many different things. And what I'm introducing today is this idea of intelligent commons, just because of the day and age we live in, where technology and AI is just so prevalent. And my hope is that through this, we kind of get a different perspective of AI, specifically in this context, and also imagine how AI can be used to develop this idea of regenerative economy, right? And I'll go through what that means to the child as well. Just a brief background about me. A lot of my current work is around developing community platforms for decentralized and regenerative economy. The idea is that can we actually imagine an economy that is different than market economy, where a lot of the capital structures kind of led, right? There are different kinds of economy that have existed in the past that continues to exist still in various different parts of the world. And the question is that, well, is there a different chapter of the economy that we can imagine for the future that is learning from other economies that exist, including market economy, as well as sort of steering this towards a system that kind of works for our communities, the kind of things that we value and care about, right? My day job, I'm a researcher at Microsoft. I have a background in community-driven innovation, and also, have a PhD in AI and operational systems. I'm also generally involved with a lot of grassroots community building and stewardship around Seattle and other places in the world as well, through many collaborations. So one of the key things is that I'm a board chair at Sustainable Seattle, which is a nonprofit organization that does a lot of these community grassroots work. And before that, I founded a healthcare company as well. So got to understand, the way the capital works in a much more deeper and closer way within that. So just to start with, I want to just start with the prompt, right? So feel free to actually, just speak up here, or again, people online as well. You can maybe unmute or type in, and if somebody can share, because I cannot see the messages right now. So if somebody can share it, there's anything that people online type in about this, right? So what does a community-centered future look like that is beyond the market? Like, what are the aspects of that? So when we imagine a community-centered future that is more attuned towards communities and community networks and coalitions and collectives of people, rather than traditional market economy, which is more towards corporations and big institutions, what are some of the aspects that look like? So feel free to share maybe a word or a phrase, or if you have long sentences as well. So what aspects of it do you imagine a community-centered future could look like?
What aspects do you imagine a community-centered future could look like? What are the aspects of a community-centered future?
Give us an example of the kind of aspects that you're thinking of.
So, do you imagine, do you imagine it to be, like, how do you imagine resource sharing to be, right? Or how do you imagine ownership to be? Or how do you imagine, like, are there principles that maybe the current market economy, or, what we call capitalism, doesn't quite hold? What principles or values this community-centered future would hold within that?
Guys, want to jump in with thoughts?
I have thoughts.
Yeah, I know Chris does. I know Chris has thoughts. I know I did too. My first question was like, is this a real imagined future, or is this imaginary imagined future? It's a real imagined future, I'm gonna guess.
A real imagined future.
Real
Yes.
imagined future. Anyone else? Otherwise, we can let Chris jump. They want, okay, go ahead, Chris, yeah.
For me, community-centered future would be like for an economy that's co-ownership in a lot of businesses, or collaborative ownership, where the people that are working in the business or are working in the industries in that economy are also shareholders or stakeholders in the business. So rather than the profits being privatized, the profits can be socialized and contribute to a greater standard of living for the community in general. So that's what I would think an aspect of community-centered future would be beyond the market, would be to make sure that not only the losses, but also the gains are socialized.
Mhm.
The community. So that I think would be an aspect for me. So that way the quality of life remains equitable across the,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very key thing. I think one of the things that maybe very implicitly you mentioned was that not just the losses, but the profits are also socialized. And that's a key thing that we recognize, that the cost of market economy is borne by a lot of common people, whereas the profits are only borne by very few, right? And that's a very critical departure. Um, yeah, thank you, Chris. That was very well articulated. Anyone else?
Um, yes, if we're kind of at the level of ideation, more conceptual, I guess, answers,
So, I cannot see everyone in the room, Miku. So if anyone's prompting to speak, then I'll wait. Otherwise, I can also move on. So do you just let me know? Yeah.
I had something for you, Peeyush.
Okay.
Um. Yeah, so if we're staying at the level of kind of ideation or conceptualization, I was gonna say, and I was kind of like lingering on this concept of community centered. I think that I always like to go with how do we define community? So if community is like people, that's one answer. But if the community is people plus the community of non-human people and life systems on this planet, then that's another answer. And so that's kind of the space I'm in right now, is the community as like a holistic community of living beings, and maybe non-living beings, wind, water, rain, stone, kumu, teachers, pin. So then what does community centered mean from that standpoint? Is it's somehow possible to develop technologies, systems, communication, economies that take into account that interconnected nature of all life systems and lift all of those systems up.
Mhm.
That's my
Mhm.
answer. If I'm allowed to say that more of an abstract answer.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you, Miku. Yeah, so some of the key things that I picked up from there was this sense of interdependence, that we as people are also part of an ecology, and that's the ecology of beings. Um, and just to quote one of the non-Western, I guess, scholars in many ways, Vandana Shiva, she or they categorize this as a living economy, right? So an economy that serves life on the planet. In fact, they have a book, I think, titled on the same name too. Um, and that is a key thing, so and one of the things that I want to bring in is that this concept of interdependence is something that we as collective are also recognizing, right? So it's one of those things that are kind of floating in the collective consciousness right now, where we understand that this chapter of economy has to have that essence of interdependence, right? And yeah, if anyone else wants to say anything, or otherwise I can just move on. Miku?
Yeah, I'm just writing down Vedana Shiva and
Yeah.
what you're saying about living economy. Yeah, I think you can move on unless we've got anyone on the chat.
Okay, so I'll move on, and if anyone wants to chime in at any point, feel free to do that. Yeah. So there we go. Okay, so this is a dense slide, but I'll break it down, right? So the idea is that when we think about community center, right, we've identified key principles here that we all connect with, right? We identified the aspect of interdependence, the ability to actually include non-human beings as well. We talked about co-ownership and cooperatively owned sort of things. We talked about a lot of like process-oriented decision making, which includes multiple voices together and so on. Some of the things that Chris brought in. So when we talk about that aspect of community and community development in this way, and I'm trying to not use the politicized aspect of it. So I know a lot of people have, again, just because of the way the phrases have been used over time, but just like purely in the way that that phrase means, like community development or developing our own communities, then one of the key aspects of that is how do we bring people together, or how do we bring different aspects of the community together for decision making to happen. And this is one of the things that I want to ground today's talk in. To actually have a collective action requires buy-in from multiple stakeholders, right? And a lot of in the ways I've understood the work that Sareen does, as well as a lot of the resilience workshops that happen, it's about bringing in the diverse representation from the community at the table, right? And for many people who have worked in the space, we recognize the cost of that, right? We recognize, I guess, like the inertia of actually doing that. So one of the things that when we work in this thing, we recognize is that communities are generally at the center of transactions, right? A lot of the way we engage, a lot of the transactions that happen within our communities, right? Either we buy and purchase things from each other, when we collaborate to make collective decisions that happen, within a community sort of a space. Whether we talk about where we get a food, and again, like this is kind of not asking the question, how do we define the boundary of a community, but a community where each and everyone depends on each and everyone else to be able to share resources or transact, right? So that's why we say that communities are generally at the center of transaction, but resources, information, or tools to coordinate these collective action are generally limited, right? And that's coming back to this idea that a lot of the resources and tools and information is centered within bigger organizations and within corporations, and that's why we say there is relative limitation in terms of like how these resources are available, right? So then the question that comes up here is that how do we provide these, how do we get access to resources and information and tools to coordinate this kind of collective action, right? And there is inherently a notion of cost and inherently a notion of inertia. And I'm taking the notion of cost more broadly than the financial cost. It's the cost of actually bringing people together to be able to collectively make decisions around a certain thing, right? So this is something that I want to preempt in this conversation with, is understanding that there is a collective action in communities and there is an inherent cost associated with this collective action. What we're trying to do is through this collective action, can we expand access to resources and information and tools that are generally available? And so this is where I would like to introduce this idea of AI, or this notion of AI. So again, another question for you. Do you use AI? And if you have used AI, or maybe even if you have not used AI, then what is your perspective of AI?
To take a sample, so everybody in the room and you guys online, if you're online, you can use an emoji. If you're in the room, you can raise your hand. Okay, so count of three, how many people have used AI? 1, 2, 3. Whole room is raising their hands. I don't know about online, you guys indicate, but yeah, so we've all used it.
Brittany says me.
Brittany says, yeah. Mhm.
And
Yeah, of course.
And
We have a lot of IT people
yeah.
in the room today too, though.
Great. So again, so that's good, right? So everyone has some interaction or some experience with AI, right? Now I want to hear maybe what is your perspective of AI? And you can speak to anything, really.
Alright. Someone in the room has a perspective. What do you guys think?
I think AI can be like something that's really helpful with sustainability as it can develop like more researches, like it can, it can fasten the researchers' time rather than spending it on useless things. Not useless, but like wasting their time on other research that's already research. They can use like they can connect the dots either with AI that's doing it on their own, which takes time and so I think AI is pretty good in terms of what you use it on, but at the same time it can be bad in certain ways. Like, the technological advancement that we have right now is kind of like getting out of hand in certain ways, going way too fast that even us humans cannot even understand it at some point. So that's the only thing about my perspective about AI.
Did you hear most of that?
Yeah, I got the gist of it. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, AI can be used to shorten the time and also consider various factors in research and research around sustainability specifically.
We have someone in the room that has a strong perspective on AI.
Hi, everybody. Well, right now I'm grading an exam that wasn't an online exam, so it's not an issue, but no, I mean, I teach geography, and so students are often using it to bypass the learning process, and it's a pretty serious issue of concern that they're missing out on their education. It's really hard to, address that. So I'm really concerned about not only the academic integrity part of it, about, learning how to be honest people, but also what are they going to get out of a college degree if they never learn how to think for themselves? So I think that's my main concern that I'm constantly trying to address. And it's especially bad with the 100% online classes, right? So anyways, that's my kind of perspective on it. I'm actually at the point where I think we're in a crisis situation because we don't have the resources to deal with it as instructors, and there's so many like AI cheerleaders out there, and it's actually preventing us from addressing the academic integrity concerns related to.
Yeah, thank you. That's one of the key points you brought up as well, and a concern that AI encourages maybe plagiarism. It encourages so bypassing this learning capability where we become very dependent on the machines and the systems to do the thing for us, where we don't quite develop that level of thinking and analysis that is required for us to be to support ourselves, to support our communities, to be successful in the world, and so on. Maybe just one more perspective. And if anyone wants to speak, maybe more systemically as well, I think that would also add some depth here.
I have a lot of thoughts. We have another very good thinker in the room here that she hasn't said anything yet.
I think like all major advancements that the human race has seen, it can be used for great good and also terrible bad. And like Ryan was saying, we're nowhere close to being in a space where we have any handle on it at all. It's just developing so much faster than we can catch up with. But on the flip side, I think it's actually really interesting how also what we were saying about, integrity and honesty, and it really brings to light, I think, almost human values that we've taken for granted, that, to a certain degree, we all are raised with that or grow up with that, or we learn that. And there really seems to not be that kind of consistency. You know, like people come truly believing that there's nothing wrong with what they're doing, you know, whether they're faking people's faces and voices or, you know, creating work that is totally not theirs at all. And it's, I mean, that's the part that really is terrifying, but it's also really interesting to me, like, what does it even really mean to be like a good citizen and a human being? You know, and how do we even define that as maybe a community of society is basically? To say, you know, that there's more to a college education than literally the piece of paper. Because I feel like we have a lot more students coming here saying, who cares? I just need the paper that says I have a degree, you know, it's almost like we have more students. Or just people in general saying, why does it matter that it's not my writing, that it's not my work? So, yeah, I am.
There's a term called technological adolescence. And then, you know, we can relate it to like nuclear energy and then nuclear weapons. And then we have all of these technologies that we use to really advance our society, and they're a product of amazing human progress, but we're just too immature to use them properly.
Yeah, these are, I mean, that's actually a very key aspect as well that we need to understand and address as well, right? I'm hearing a lot of existential questions around AI, ethical questions around AI as well, and then understanding like, well, how do we perceive this thing, right? So this is actually a good segue to actually continue for the next slide here. And Brittany also online said something about I've used it for therapeutic purposes due to the lack of therapists in the VA. It has produced a lot of amazing work too. So there is also that part about it, right? So we are holding this kind of like in a way duality, and you know really a lot of the spectrum of this conversation where there we see the potential. Everyone among us have used AI, so we know when we have used AI, you know, it has helped us to do certain things in a more effective manner in ways that we might not have been able to do prior, as well as you know, there's these very significant concerns around the ethics of AI, as well as some of these more existential questions around, well, what does it mean to be a student? What does it mean to be humans in the society, and so on, right? And then there's the whole spectrum in between. Now, as I go to the next slide here, let's see. So I'll click this and I'll come back here, right? And I want to invite us to actually think about this in all these different aspects that we talked about, and also think about this aspect of commons, right? So just to like take a step back again, you know, we started with the idea of intelligent commons, right? We said, well, what are the commons? Commons are something, you know, these are shared resources that we as a collective, as a public manage, right? Most of the commons are managed publicly. In some cases, some commons are managed within a community, right? And the difference between public and community is that public is essentially a large collective of people, while community is localized through a certain sense of maybe belonging or certain, you know, sharing of identity and so on, right? And typically, as we have understood this, is that things that are considered commons are public infrastructures that we rely on to conduct our day-to-day activities and businesses and life in general, right? So these are things like the internet, for instance. Nobody really owns the internet. It's in a way publicly owned. Anyone can make a website there and so on. Roads, communication, school, waste, and so many other things, right? Now, when we think about this world, and when we think about the world where AI was not such a big force as it is today, we understood the infrastructure to be that way, right? Now, with AI coming in, a lot of the conversations and the conversation we were just having as well, just a few moments ago, we think of AI as a technology that interacts with this infrastructure, right? That could be, again, these very physical infrastructures, it could be social infrastructures or community infrastructures, right? How does AI associate with schools and therefore learning? How does AI connect with communication and communication abilities? The idea of plagiarizing, someone's art or someone's image, right? Again, so we are thinking of AI as a technology. Now, that is a role that AI plays. AI plays a role of a technology. Typically, when we talk about this concept, where we are saying that AI can be useful, so AI is good, or AI is harmful, or AI is bad in that way, we think of there is an underlying sense there that AI is privately owned there, and that's why it's sort of a black box to us as people, because there is that sort of a barrier between accessing AI and because it is privately owned, we cannot really control what it does. We can only control how we interact with it. And because it is such a black box thing, we can either interact with it in useful ways or we can interact with it in harmful ways, right? Now, one of the things that I want to introduce with this talk is this idea that AI can also be viewed as a commons. We are not there yet. This is, again, not the present world. In fact, there are some examples of that, but majority of the examples are still that AI is still viewed as a technology. But as we're imagining this future, and this is again a very realistic future that we can imagine. I mean, anything can only be real if we can actually imagine that happening, right? So where AI is an infrastructure. And the idea and the essence of this infrastructure is understanding that it actually reduces the cost of collective action. So let's take a traditional infrastructure like road or school or ways for communication. They all play many different aspects and many different parts. But one of the critical things that they play is that they reduce the cost of doing business. They reduce the cost of interaction. They reduce the cost of building better relationships, right? So because the roads exist and because roads are generally free to operate on, like anyone can pick up their bike or car and just drive, it emphasizes a level of business and connection that otherwise would have been very difficult to do, right? So, we only have to think of, maybe a couple of 100 years ago, where because the roads were not the way they are and the technology that exists on the road was not the way that is today, meeting a family that lives even 100 miles away was a big undertaking. But now, I can just drive for a couple hours and actually meet them, right? And not even 100 miles, but even 5 miles or 10 miles would have been very prohibitive if we didn't have the kind of infrastructure that we have today, right? So similarly, when we think of AI as this infrastructure, then we can start thinking of AI in different ways, right? Instead of thinking of AI as a technology that we can use, we can actually think of AI in what it could enable as a society, as a collective, as a community, right? And this opens up opportunity for us to ask more interesting questions, as well as take action that could build that kind of future where we started with, right? When we started in the starting saying, well, what does a community-centered future look like, right? So we can think about those concepts, we can hold those concepts and this idea of AI, where we have like so many different perspectives and thoughts together, right? Let's talk about this a little bit further, right? So we all know and we all understand that the current market economy that exists is severely limited in many different ways, right? It has served purposes that have been somewhat good, and it has also served purposes that have had negative impacts on people, collective, as well as non-human beings, as we introduced it earlier in the talk today, right? So when we want to move beyond markets, we have to understand that the nature of the market right now is based on consumption optimism for commodities and services. So there is an optimism that people are going to consume more of these commodities that I'm producing, more of the services that I'm offering, then that has a higher value, right? So it's really comes back to how do we assign value there, right? And this is how it's assigned value. But who has that optimism? Typically, these are the big investment banks and big institutions who already have resources that drives this kind of optimism. So again, only very few people have that, and because of that, the values that these markets actually reflect are the values of these very few people. Um, and as it was brought up earlier in the talk, I think Chris said that, right? But the cost of that is borne by everyone else as well. Right? So moving beyond market society means to foster living economy that delivers what is truly good, useful, and desirable for all. Right. So that's the guiding star that we want to hold. Now, looking back, there have been many different kind of economies that have existed, and many of these still exist in the world, right? And this is by no means an exhaustive list. I just picked up a few different economies that are easy to categorize, but that could be a whole talk in itself about the history of economy and uh, different cultural aspects of economy and so on, right? So we understand there's a gift economy that exists in many different cultures in the world, which is essentially basically based on relationships and the social fabric that exists within that culture, right? So gifts denote a level of social relationship that exists. In many parts of the world, in fact, most of the world used to live on sustenance economy that is very that has decreased significantly. It's very little and in very few places in the world. So sustenance economy is basically saying that everyone just takes enough that is enough for them to live a decent life, right? So if you're getting food, you're just getting enough food for you to have one meal, right? And a lot of the world used to live that way, and that way we used to live maybe more in harmony with the nature because there was no surplus of storing things. There was no hoarding. There was no warehouses that would store many tons of products and things, right? But again, we can't go to that world because the lifestyles have changed. The population on the world has increased significantly, and people want more things in life than maybe what our ancestors wanted or knew even what was possible, right? Then there's participatory economy, planned economy, and so on, right? So there's many different economies that we know of. Now, when we look forward, at least in the ways I understand it, I call it living economy or regenerative economy. Again, this is not just me calling it. There's many people who actually try to phrase it in this way. But as we started this talk again, sharing all the things that we share, we know that it is collectively focused. We know that it has a local aspect to it. So it is localized resilience, right? So we are not talking about these goods and services that are exchanged so impersonally that we don't quite understand the value of it, right? There is something about this economy that fosters local resilience. We talked about resource sharing and we talked about sustainable management in the sense that it takes an ecological perspective, a perspective of human and non-human beings alike in that way. So the conjecture that I'm sharing here is that when we think of AI as infrastructure, as a common, then we can talk about a different way of understanding AI, right? AI that facilitates this kind of regenerative living economy. And I want to give you one example, right? And it'll be a fairly quick example because we're kind of coming up on time here. So this is about the energy transition. And I'm going to just skip here and come back to this slide, right? When we talk about energy transition, essentially, maybe some of you are familiar with this already, but essentially what is happening is that a lot of the world is trying to move towards renewable sources of energy. So that is something that is already happening, right? But because of that movement, there is an opportunity for individuals and communities to own the source of energy production, which was not possible before. Because before, you used to have big power plants like hydropower or coal power or even nuclear power, right? No individual or no community can really own those kind of infrastructures, right? So it has to be either privatized through corporations or governments have to own it, right? But anyone can put a solar panel on their rooftop, and anyone, again, within limits, can have wind turbines and so on, right? Or anyone can put a small gas plant or even a hydropower that is powering through a stream that might be flowing through the neighborhood or something, right? So this gives this opportunity of thinking about infrastructure that can be collectively owned rather than owned by institutions or governments as such, right? Now, the problem is that because of that, because of nature of this kind of decentralization, so we call it decentralization because it's not a big central power plant that is powering the entire neighborhood or entire city or a state, but essentially these very small units that are powering individual homes and individual neighborhoods and so on, collectively connected together, right? But the nature of complexity is very high for that. And that is the reason that it's inaccessible for people still, right? It's not, at least it's possible now, but it's still inaccessible because of the nature of complexity. And this is where AI actually comes in, right? So what AI does is it becomes this fabric that runs the operational aspect of this particular infrastructure in a way that it becomes accessible for people. Again, this is an imagined future. It's happening in very few places in the world, but not at any big scale right now, right? But we have to be able to imagine this for this to be a reality where what AI becomes in this case, and I'm going to just go here, is essentially a public infrastructure where it automates a lot of this operational complexity that is very difficult for individuals or even small groups of people to do because we lack the kind of resources that are needed for that to happen, right? But with AI, again, that cost decreases quite significantly. And that is what, again, in this imagined future, one of the aspects that AI can do is facilitate that, right? When we think about AI in this way, we can start thinking of AI as something that can facilitate knowledge sharing, right? That can facilitate collaborations, that can provide us with, help us to make sense of this complex world where, weathers are changing, the climate is changing, the markets are becoming very volatile and very unpredictable, and so on, right? So AI starts becoming this translation engine where two groups of people can actually interact with each other within this commons marketplace. So I would like to actually start bringing this talk to a close, and again ask a question, and would love to hear what you all think about this. So what if, so this is a scenario building exercise, what if communities collectively controlled AI to maybe improve public health or regenerate local ecosystems or manage collective resources or just community infrastructure? How would that scenario look like? Like, do you think that could be possible, and what would it take for that to be possible?
All thinking. We're sitting with it, Peeyush.
Yeah, take your time.
Okay, fine. Chris wants to answer.
No, well, while you
No,
guys,
no,
while you guys
you
think,
answer and then we'll digest that.
So I think the type of work that needs to be done for communities to collectively control AI to improve standards of living. If you ask AI to give you a list of values, it'll give them to you, but you have to know who is training that AI, right? It's whose values is it giving you? And so I think that the first work that would have to be done was that the community would have to collectively learn how to build that AI and how to train that AI themselves to make sure that it reflects the values and the goals of their community, right? Because if you're using meta AI, for example, right, you don't want to use something that was developed by a large corporation is probably not going to reflect the values of your community-based organization. So I think that if you can train the AI to have the values from scratch that you want it to have, or to have the value of collectively bringing up community, then I'd be interested to see what kind of AI that could create, rather than an AI that we have now that's focused on creating a product, on just using it for production. So I think that that's something that could be really, really interesting to see. I think that's what I'm imagining right now, is what kind of AI could exist if it was built by people who had a collective interest in each other. What kind of AI does that create? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very important question to ask again, right? And I want to draw an analogy here, right? This is the same question you would ask maybe about, well, if my community values this particular kind of food system and this particular kind of food growth, then how do I actually build that kind of community food infrastructure, right? So you're asking the same question. If my community values, holds these principles and values as important, right? Then what kind of AI could reflect those values and principles? And this is a very important question to ask, because here we are thinking of AI as an infrastructure and not just as a technology anymore, right?
You know, this question is really, well, I love Chris's answer. But I also am thinking a lot about what Nikki said and what Ryan said and what we're seeing, what I'm seeing in our classes, and like these two are here. I don't know if you can see me, but, and their whole degree program's online. And they've never met each other, they've never met their teachers, and it's like a college class, like, you know, it's not through an online school, it's through an actual like brick and mortar school. I'm just concerned for the creation of human beings, you know, like how can we contribute to the development of AI without losing our humanity in the process? I think that's like, and if the humans that we're building it from a space that had the value system that Chris is speaking about, that had indigeneity and wisdom. And that those are the humans that we're building it, which mostly they're not, though I know you've been involved with a little bit of some of those things, but that's like, yeah, that's kind of a bigger concern that I have, like what we're losing as we dream and begin to, you know, it's just, yeah, so it's hard from right now at this moment to see that. Yeah, Mickey has something to share.
Sorry,
Yes, can I quickly just respond to that before before we move on to yeah, this is a very important question to ask as well, and you know, I want to draw an analogy here as well, and this is important, right? So before we had the kind of infrastructure that we have today, and I'm not talking about AI, you know, just the regular infrastructure, right? Like, for example, I come from India, and in India, the school system, the traditional school system, used to be what we used to call it Gurukul, right? And what that used to mean at that time was that for anyone to actually study, they would have to come and stay with the teacher, right? So we didn't have those kind of problems that we, you know, talk about in the universities today about class sizes and the teacher-student ratio. I mean, it was basically, in many cases, it was like 1-to-1, 1-to-2, or like just very few students, right? And they would stay with the teacher. So the instructions were not just oral and verbal, but they were more experiential in that way, right? Now, as things evolved and as things changed, obviously that kind of apprentice-based schooling system it exists, but it's not a mainstream thing anymore, right? But that's because we adapted and we evolved into something as a society where it could work within the lifestyle that we as a collective want, right? And can actually have, right? So then when we think about, again, like not necessarily as something about what AI as a tool could do, but how, as an infrastructure, as it's available, how does it intersect with the schooling system, right? How does, when it interacts with the schooling system, what is this new aspect of learning that we are stepping into with that, right? What are we learning to be in this world and to be able to create that kind of world which is prosperous and desirable and useful for our communities and for ourselves, right? So it's a little bit of thinking about it in a different way, right? It's again, like, coming back to that, it's like more of an ecological thinking rather than thinking of it as a standalone uh, system that can be used for good or used for bad, kind of a thing.
Let's talk to you more about that. Okay,
Yes.
let's, Mickey.
I think it's related, but that first what if I'm really fixating on communities collectively control and never mind even AI. But I think there's an underlying assumption that we still have community, that we are able to come together collectively, and that we're engaged enough and have agency to control anything. And I come from growing up in a really strong, close-knit community, but it's the exception to the rule now. And so, if communities could collectively anything, I think whether that's AI or any kind of new technology, I think there's tremendous potential and hope. But I almost feel like we have to start by building community again, to bring people to want to engage collectively as a community, to engage in this task, because I think that could be amazing, but I don't know how many communities like that do we have that could come together like that would engage like that.
Yeah, that's again, that's a very crucial concern as well. And around the world, we are seeing this breaking away of communities in this way, right? In addition to that, I also want to actually share a totally different aspect of a community that doesn't look like traditional communities in many ways, but that is also flourishing too, right? And just to draw that analogy to help us see like what is happening, just for us to understand the nature of what is happening, right? So what we see is that one of the examples, and this is not a standalone example, there's a lot of like online communities that exist right now, which has a very different feel to it than place-based communities. The communities that are coming together because they share the same tradition or they connect with the same place and so on, right? But then the question that comes to me when I see that is, why is it that communities, like online communities, are flourishing while communities that are in person in the physical world, they're not the same that they used to be, right? What do we understand with that, and how do we use that understanding to be able to imagine that future that we connect with here around, where communities can come together as a collective to advocate for our own infrastructure, right? And having said that, I mean, and there's also a lot of projects, a lot of communities that are trying to do that as well. So that is happening too, but it's an uphill battle, right? And again, the question is, how do we use the resources again that we have already with us to help us build both those kind of collaborations and coalitions for communities to come together? So I mean, I just have a lot of questions here, really no answer, but this is I guess this is the part of collective, discussion and bargaining.
A lot of that.
Hi Peeyush, good to see you.
Hi, Luke. Good to see you too.
I was just thinking about what you're saying about, and we're over time now, I should probably go there, but these are good discussions. Our students, I don't wanna say dragged me, but, convinced me to get on Discord, right? Like, so I've been avoiding it for many years, actually. And it's kind of crazy because, be in the world, I'll be with Luke, I'll be in a real life situation. My phone's got ding, 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 and then there's like little cat memes, and there's like all these things, and it's like very stimulating. And it's so interesting because it's completely taking me away from the experience of living my life right now. Being present for the life around me, to interact with all of those living and non-living life systems that I was mentioning. And then I was going like, oh, yeah, so fun. We're just really good at that. Like it, and there's like an ancient part of me is so fulfilled with this sense of community and this vibrant, there's like a vibrant aliveness to it. But it's completely taking me away from being present right here. And I mean, and I have pretty strong practices about how to be present. So people without those practices, I can't even imagine. So yeah, I just feel like this session is kind of having me walk away with like maybe deepening the inquiry and more questions. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think I feel overwhelmed by it all. But at least we're having the dialogue. So maybe we need to have you come back, Peeyush.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things here to unpack. But again, thank you, Miku, for having me here. Hopefully, this helps us deepen and ask more questions around what this means, right? The more questions we ask, the better chances we have to develop some kind of answers and orientations about what it means for this collective future.
To close
Yeah.
today, can you give us some homework? Give us a next step or an action item or a tangible. I mean, maybe it is to ask more questions, but give us something to do if you can.
Yeah.
Between
Well,
now and the next time we talk.
You know, I would, and I can share some of the slides as well, but I would say maybe just take this question and, you know, and reflect on this from this perspective of AI as an infrastructure and not AI as a technology, right? And see like where do we get to? And this could be, I mean, this could be broadened to not just AI, but other infrastructures as well. But specifically within the context that we are living in today and all the concerns, I think conversations around AI are also as important as conversations around energy and other things as well, right? So maybe just taking this and, you know, you can take a screenshot of this, or I can send it to you separately as well. But just thinking about this question with this perspective of AI as an infrastructure that could potentially be collectively owned.
Well, we'll give ourselves an advanced question because I was looking at the question of roads as an infrastructure. And one of Peeyush and my shared teachers, Chiogaten, as part of a Salish prophecy about roads, that one day these black rivers would cover the earth. These black rivers being roads and all the challenges about roads. And yet, as you did describe, roads are an infrastructure that are really critical to support human life systems. But of course, they have many repercussions for all life systems. And so the question, right, is like, yeah, not just thinking about AI as infrastructure, but how do we think about AI as that regenerative living infrastructure? And even like what are examples of regenerative living infrastructure that we can look to? Because I can only think of a canoe so far. I'm not sure. Like, what are examples of regenerative living infrastructure that we have right now? And that might be another question.
You know, and just to actually add to that, so when we think about, let's say, even road as an infrastructure, right? There is a difference between thinking of road as a public infrastructure and road as a community infrastructure, because the community infrastructure, one gets more agency and more sovereignty to define what that road transportation look like, So maybe it doesn't have to be in a particular community, it doesn't have to be a Black River, it could be something else, right? But at least, and that's the critical thing. We can only know what it could be when we actually do that exercise of imagining what it means for a community, right? And the interdependent, interconnected web of all the infrastructures that live within a community. So road is not different from the ecosystem, it's not different from schooling, it's not different from waste in that way, right? That they're interconnected.
Okay, we better stop. Peeyush, thank you so much for joining us today and engaging us in a really deep and thought-provoking discussion. And we'll share out the recording so people can listen and those who weren't here. If people have questions, are they able to contact you? If you want to put your contact in the chat, or I'll send that out for the folks in the room here.
Yeah, certainly.
And yeah, if everyone wants to just give a big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining me here today as well.
Okay, we'll chat more. Thanks, Peeyush. We'll see you later. Bye, everybody.